Mr. President, it's strange for me sitting with you because we were both in Iraq together in 2003, but we were on different sides. I was part of the American-British occupation, and you were fighting for Al-Qaeda against the occupation. And I never imagined I would sit down like this to talk to you in this way.
Does it not feel very strange to be the president now? You're in this palace that Assad was in. You've been a fighter, you've been a prisoner, you've been a warrior, you've been a leader, and now you're president. Does this not feel very, very strange?
I was a fighter, but it wasn't because I wanted to fight. And today I am the president, but it's not because I wanted to be president. Syrians endured terrible oppression for 60 years. During the past 14 years, their society has been systematically destroyed. People were displaced, murdered, killed with chemical weapons, and tortured in the regime's prisons. The regime did not take up on any of the political solutions that were offered to it. It refused to meet any of the people's demands. After things escalated and fighting began, it was offered lots of political solutions from regional countries and the international community, but it refused any political solution and continued to destroy Syrian society.
So we say in English that the child is father of the man, and sometimes we feel that our childhood helps to make us. Can you share anything about your childhood and the values of your childhood that helped you become the person you are today?
My family comes originally from the Golan, now occupied by the Israeli state. I was born in Saudi Arabia, I lived in Damascus, then went to Iraq, and finally came back to Syria for the sake of the blessed Syrian revolution. So my life had many stages, and during this journey I was introduced to many ideas. In my childhood, I was like any other child. I lived in a neighborhood that was well off, middle class or upper middle class. I went to elementary school in Damascus, then middle school and high school. After that, during my first year in college, war broke out in Iraq. I felt that I had to go there. Our region, generally back then, was going through a difficult time. This was when the Intifada was happening in occupied Palestine, and many Palestinians were killed, especially in 2000 and 2001 and 2002. I'm from a sort of a political family. My father had been a political refugee in Iraq, and he wrote about political issues. For Saudi and Syrian newspapers, we talked about politics in our home.
Your father was a leading figure in the Damascus Spring, and in the end, the Damascus Spring was not successful. What lessons did you learn from that failure? Was the problem for the Damascus Spring ideological or tactical?
Generally, there is a strong political culture in Arab societies, but ordinary people have no experience of practical politics because Arab regimes don't let them take part in it. And without that experience, they can't have a correct practical understanding of political reality. Also, in a country like Syria, there wasn't any forum for engaging in practical politics. So the Damascus Spring was born dead.
You were in Iraq as a fighter for 3 years and then in prison for 5 years. What was it like being in a prison? How did that change you? What did it teach you? And how did you become this figure that rose so quickly through the ranks of the various organizations that involved in insurgency?
As I mentioned, back then I was 19 years old or so when I started to realize just how much oppression there was in Syria and the wider region. The Palestinian Intifada had a big impact on me psychologically. I felt the need to learn, and I read a lot about Damascus and Syria, the incredible depth of its history and the great civilization it represents, as it is the first city known to humans. I often walked through the alleyways of old Damascus, and I could feel history speaking from every corner. But at the same time, I could see the state of the country and the appalling way that the former government was running the country. I felt pain for the burden that Damascus carried, and how the regime was abusing Syrian society and this ancient city. I believed that this regime should fall, but at that time we didn't have the means or the experience. So I decided to go to wherever I could gain some experience. This was at the same time that the Americans were preparing to enter Iraq. There was a strong Arab and Islamic reaction against what the Americans were doing. So I had two reasons for going there. First, I saw it as an opportunity to learn and gain valuable experience by witnessing a total war, so that I could return to Syria and benefit from the knowledge I would gain. Secondly, I was driven by the passion and youthful spirit I had to defend the people of Iraq from occupation. You may not understand that, but you have to remember that I was a young man then, and I had a particular mindset. So I went to Iraq and worked with various different groups. Eventually, these groups, one by one, started to shrink and merge into Al-Qaeda. And that is how I found myself with Al-Qaeda.
And tell us about life in prison.
In Iraq, I was put in prison early on. I was sent to the infamous Abu Ghraib prison, where people were being tortured. Then I moved to Buka prison. After that, I was moved to Kropa prison in Baghdad, and finally to Taji prison before being released. So during this tour of prisons, I got to know a lot of people, and I was myself becoming more politically mature. So I came to see that there was a big difference between what I stood for and some of the ideas that I was hearing from other prisoners, which were really shocking to me. I mean, this was at a time when sectarian conflict was causing a lot of problems in Iraq, and I had no part in that at all. Even inside the prison, I did not operate the same way as others. As a result, I came in for criticism from some of the other prisoners who believed in what later became ISIS's ideology. During my time in Iraq, especially while in prison, I focused on planning my return to Syria. Even before the revolution began, I talked to a few people, particularly some Syrians, who were also in prison. It was by fate that I was released just 2 days before the Syrian revolution started. As soon as I could, I quickly made arrangements and went back to Syria. I had set some conditions beforehand. First, that we would not repeat the Iraq experience in Syria. We wouldn't take part in any kind of sectarian war. Our focus was going to be on fighting the regime. I came to Syria with a small group of people, about 5 or 6 of us. In a year, this number grew to 5,000, and I had reach across almost all Syrian provinces. Al-Qaeda in Iraq were surprised to see that. Then they wanted to do in Syria what they had done in Iraq, which I strongly opposed. This led to a major conflict between us, during which more than 1,200 of my people were killed, and I lost 70% of my forces. We regrouped. We stayed focused on fighting the regime. We also had to tackle some threats on the margin from ISIS and groups like that.
حرب النظام مع معالجة بعض المخاطر الجانبية من دواعش وغيرهم يعني.
It's strange for me sitting with you because we were both in Iraq together in 2003. but we were on different sides. I was part of the American-British occupation, and you were fighting for Al-Qaeda against the occupation. And I never imagined I would sit down like this to talk to you in this way.